Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Anastagio. I'm at my home studio setup, Aristide Records, and I'm doing a little bit of a background on how I created my album, Last One Standing.
I used to work for the Maybachs. No fake jewels, man, I hate that. Counting my change like I need that. I'll just touch down, see the recap.
Alright, so for the actual first song on the album, we have the track called Recap. It was November 14th, 2019 at 10 o'clock. I think I started with the piano because that's usually how I start my tracks. I like writing melodies first. Well, at least more recently. Back in the day it might have been different, but for this project I know I started with a lot of the melodies and built on top of that. So I started with this. Honest, again, I ended up playing this, so like I really wanted it to have a feel to it. I had the first melody like I was just playing, and then I put drums to it. But by the second hook, I was kind of like, alright, it needs to change up and do something different. And I altered it. Actually, if you listen to the second verse, when I do my backing vocals after the second hook, you can hear this. So that's what I came with as my, like, I guess bridge or C-section into the second verse. And it gives it a whole nother feel, in my opinion. It kind of slows down the pace of the song for like a little bit, and then it brings you right back into it, which I really thought was really interesting and cool. And that's actually the chord that I end with on the song too as well, ironically. Oh, and oh my god, I almost forgot. There's actually a Spanish guitar on this to give it like a further classical feel. And that again, I also just improvised on the piano and just played it out, you know. And then I guess I could go into the drums a little bit. Drums, I usually just kind of just feel them out in my head and just sometimes play the kick live on here or on my pad itself. I haven't really been doing too much hi-hat chops, so it was kind of straightforward in that aspect of just doing a simple 16th note pattern and then, you know, filling in the gaps with your words. Sometimes less is more with production, and in this case it really was. But also I did, once I finally finished recording and all that stuff and writing it, I ended up putting an airplane taking off effect. I just touched down, see the recap. So I took that as, alright, I'm taking off, I'm touching down, you know, what could represent that? An airplane. You're about to make some moves, you know, only up from here type shit. And that's where I ended up getting that. And like I said, with the C section of the song, I ended up using that as the outro and then holding the chord, like I said, for the outro, like for the fade outro. And then that's how you got to give it that really cinematic feel. And I wanted a lot of sound effects on this album, to be honest, because it really would give it that cinematic feel. So that's why I ended up putting like sound effects like that throughout the album, like waves crashing or airplanes taking off, or, you know, clapping like an applause, or phone ringing, stuff like that. It's all meant to like connect the album and make it a full piece of work. And the word process for when I was writing the words, it was pretty much, I usually write my hooks on the spot. So when I wrote this one, I'm pretty sure I came up with the hook and wrote the words to it, and then I sat on it since November till about the time of this album's creation. And that was how I ended up, you know, putting this on the album. Was I had all these songs like from the past, and I kind of just, you know, tied them together and talked about what I really wanted to talk about. I kind of feel like I was writing this album a little bit more before I even like really sat down and said, alright, I'm gonna make an album, because this is an example of what I'm talking about. Like, I've always been wanting to put out an album, and this was one of those songs that I just felt like oh, this fits my vibe, this fits how I feel, this fits what I want to put out to the world. So I ended up using it. And I originally had this as track number 7, I believe, and I replaced the opening track, which was supposed to be What's the Word, as you can tell by the shirt, featuring Cass Johnson. This was going to be the opening track, and then my boy Trinidad ended up suggesting, why don't you flip them? Because I made the sequence of the album, and the only songs that ended up getting flipped in the sequence were those 2 songs, because I felt like I need to open the album without a feature. It needs to be just me. And it really did fit, and I think a lot more people paid attention to this record because of the fact that it was the first full track on the album.
I'm making waves like the tide. Ooh, making waves like the tide. I'm making waves like the tide. Ooh, making waves like the tide.
So for the track Tides, which features Lil Castro, the beat originally was made September 27th, 2019, and it was 7:38. I remember actually just producing it right over on my my dresser right over there. It's out of shot right now, but I used to do a lot of that, where I would stand at my dresser with just my laptop, no piano, no nothing, and just play. And this is actually one of the notable times that I used that C minor Hungarian scale that I was talking about. And originally it never started like the way you hear it, which is that piano. It originally just started out with the actual main piano line, which was that was originally what the whole song was all the way through. There was no outro like change up, and there was no intro change up. Those all came later in the production process of making the album. In fact, the outro came really late. I think it was like February, I want to say, I made the actual outro, which was this. Changed up the drum sound towards the end, and you get this. That was gonna originally be a separate beat that I was making in February, but it just so happened that I recognized, like, this is exactly the same key signature. Let me just tag it on to the end of the song and then put the sound effect on it, the ocean waves crashing. And I think that really just glued the whole song together, was having the intro and outro. But I think what's most notable for some people is the fact that you have that like slow intro, like that's ominous, like this. The intro came in around January, I want to say, and actually if you look at my Instagram, there's a video of me playing the intro without any sound effects or anything. That was the day I actually created the intro, so like that was completely improvised and a little bit of a happy accident, and that's actually how I came up with the intro. I actually do a violin on the last hook to give it a little something extra, you know, other than just having a piano the whole way through. And then the writing process, like I said, I always start with my hooks. This is one of those ones where I was making the beat right on my dresser and I wrote the hook right then and there. I literally didn't even finish structuring the beat. I just made the pattern and I already had the hook in my head. I was just like, oh my god, making waves like the tide, you know? And that was pretty much all that really went into the hook so much, you know? I really wanted to keep it simple, and I like the idea of putting like the sound effects of the waves to it. So I don't think I had that in mind, but as the album was progressing, I was like, oh wait, why can't I just add like, you know, waves crashing or something? And if you listen to Lil Castro's verse, there's actually a part where the waves crashing is kind of like in the background of what he's saying. I make a wave like a feet, I make a wave like a tide, you know, like that's where it comes in. And I feel like that was a really nice touch in that effect, you know, other than just putting it on the intro and outro. Verse-wise, I'd say I wrote the verse, I want to say around October of 2019, because I originally was going to just be a solo on this one. I didn't really want features on this. And after a lot of persuasion from Lil Castro, he ended up getting on this record. And I'm glad he did, because honestly, he made one of the memorable verses of the project on this track. So I originally was going to write a second verse, and I was writing a second verse, but I got him on it and he killed it. So I ended up just doing one verse, and that's why it ended up with just me doing a small little verse in the beginning and then doing the hook. And I think that really worked out well in the long run. A little bit of a behind the scenes of how he wrote it, his verse. I would say he had it written prior to when we actually recorded it, before he even got arrested, I'd say. But he did end up making changes on the spot, and that was something notable. I actually have one of the pieces of paper he wrote his lyrics on to make the changes because his phone got confiscated when he got arrested in January. So one notable thing about this song itself is this is the only track that has vocals recorded outside of this very room, and that is because Lil Castro is on house arrest as we currently speak, and he leaves on August 7th, 2020. So I had to do what I had and take my entire setup, the speakers and everything, to his house and record it in his apartment, in his bedroom. And that's why if you listen to it, you can even hear like the ambience from his apartment.
Money was knocking, I let him in. My only homie is Benjamin. It's true. They're all kicking the adrenaline. Hey, yeah, I don't got time for no feminine.
So that's pretty much it. That's Tides.
Days of my life like another puzzle, picture perfect, lost in the shuffle. I pray my past don't haunt me. Yeah, gonna be the last one standing.
So next on this album we have the actual title track, Last One Standing. And the way this one came about was very, very inspiring. I think this is originally what really inspired me to make the album what it was when I put it out. I gotta stand here by myself and really do my own thing and still put out content that's good. So I was just killing myself trying to get these songs together, you know, and put something out, you know, so people could hear what we're still doing and up to. Yeah, that was it. Those 3 chords. The story behind that piano part, like the chord progression was, I was on the phone with one of Lil Castro's old friends right after he just got arrested, and I was on the phone talking to him about some business moves. I was just dabbling on the keyboard, you know, like fucking around, just thinking like, oh well, what can I do? Originally, I made the piano sound, but the piano sound was giving me some troubles, so I ended up dubbing the piano with a regular piano. So there's 2 pianos on this. There's an affected piano that I made and created with my own sounds, and then there's just a regular piano with some reverb on it. The fact that I was able to create my own piano and then put a piano on top of it, it gives like this extra texture to it, which really makes the song unique in that aspect. And then I threw some like drums in for the bridge that was different, like an actual perk effect, which was just this. And I think I used a delay effect on it. Yeah. And then I had a different outro. And again, this was one of those times where I was like late, maybe like February, mid-February, somewhere around there. And I was just saying to myself, I'm like, it's gonna be my debut album. I can't just keep putting out songs that loop over and over and over again. So I ended up coming up with an outro of strings, which I didn't even originally think it was gonna be strings, but it just came out that way. I've always liked string sections, and if you listen to some of my records over the time period, you could hear like I use a lot of like orchestral arrangements, and I really feel like that fits the album too because it's a very classical theme. So it kind of just worked itself out in that aspect and way. And I ended up just playing it on the keyboard and coming up with this. See, I added in the perk effect that I had for the bridge, and put a clap and a different kick on there as the outro, and that really just solidified it as a whole nother section. And I just pretty much freestyled the drums. Like, I played it on here, I'm pretty sure, and that's usually how it goes, you know. I like to freestyle my stuff out instead of just clicking it in, because then it sounds very stiff and lifeless, you know. And then there's one other thing I added before I close this out in terms of production, which was the guitar. Now, the guitar, mind you know it, only happens for like a handful of seconds. Very like Nirvana-esque chorus guitar, distorted and whatnot. So I feel like that just summed it up, you know, in terms of that. In terms of writing process, I originally had written the words, I think not even a week after I finished the beat, I had the whole song written. Like my hooks always come first, and this was another example of the hooks coming first, and then I wrote my verses. Like, I think by the 4th day I had my verses, and I just was doing some touching up and whatnot, and the recording had already started by then. I showed it to Anastagio, and when I first showed him my rough, like, I had the 2 verses and the hook, all that stuff recorded, not the dubs and ad-libs, but he ended up crying when he heard the 2nd verse, because, you know, the song is about him. Like, at the end of the day, you know, if you really like analyze what it's about about being the last one standing from your team, and you're talking about your team falling apart. And I even mentioned him, you know, like, shout out Lil Castro, because we was just some assholes just making waves in the game. Cash flows, we radical, and that just says it all. Like, you know, like that he was, you know, going away, you know, and I just felt like I wanted to say that. And that is Last One Standing.
I just got a bag with some nerd niggas. It's talking static, but I never really heard niggas. What's the word, nigga? What's the word, nigga? What's the word, nigga? Yeah, I just got a bag.
So for the track What's the Word, featuring Cash Johnson, ironically I'm wearing the shirt today. What's the Word? Merch available. I got shirts for What's the Word and No Hope. Green design or pink design. You know, designed all by my brother, by the way. Thank you, Pat, for doing that. I appreciate you. So this one, in terms of like when I made it, the beat was made in October 3rd at 11:02 a.m. So this was a morning track. I used to write a lot of my songs in the morning, to be honest. And this was one of those ones where I was just fucking around on the piano, and I really like playing the piano for some reason, but I was fucking around on the piano and I came up with this. And right off the bat, I knew as soon as I wrote that piano, I was like, oh, this is gonna be a banger. You know what I mean? I already had the drums in my head as soon as I played that, so it was a matter of just building up the arrangement a little bit. And I think right off the bat, I originally heard this in my head as well, which was the synth. Which is just a simple synth climb, but that shit builds and makes it feel so much stronger, in my opinion. So I made the piano, I made the orchestra hits, and then I made the synth. So this was the orchestra hits. And it was pretty straightforward. Like I said, when I had made the piano, I already knew what I was going to do for the drums. So like all I really had to do was just go in there and lay out like my snare, you know, my hi-hats, and you know, my kick and my 808. All that shit was in my head. Like I said, I really didn't have to think too much about this one. The only thing that was really bothering me was like how to sequence it, because I really don't like making beats that are loops, that are just continuously the same thing all the way through. So ironically, I just kind of settled for the verse and was like, alright, I'll keep it simple for the verse. And then for the outro, I changed it up and did a whole nother drum set sound, which you have is this. The change up though, however, for the outro drums came later on. which I don't know specifically when it happened, but I do know it did come up later on, so I can't give you a specific date on that, but I do know it was a separate session. Because that was like, again, like I did all these change-ups and different sections to songs towards like the middle, if not end of like the album process, because I was trying to make it the best it could be. And that's actually one of the other songs that actually ends abruptly, but it kind of doesn't. It actually has an outro to it instead of just like complicated where it's like just end a hook, that's it. In terms of like writing the words, I ended up, I think, asking Cass Johnson if he wanted to finally do another feature after like our track Leaving. We did a track together called Leaving around March of 2019, and this was our follow-up to it, because I asked him, I'm like, hey bro, it's time to like get back in the studio and try and, you know, follow that track up, but I don't really want to do that type of, you know, feeling again. I want to do something different. So the day I made the beat, he came through that afternoon and I played it for him. He was like, nah, what's that, bro? Play that shit back. And he ended up writing his hook right on the spot. That was one of those instances where, like I said, the hook usually comes right on the spot. You know when that's the record. And that was it. So he had written his hook and I was like, damn, that's a pretty hard hook. How am I going to follow that up? So I ended up sitting on that for a good maybe month or two, I want to say. And then that's when I actually finally had my verse written. And it was pretty fast. When I wrote the verse, I knew I had the verse. I didn't really change it up too much. I tried changing it up, but I ended up going with my original verse because I knew like that's what I want to put out. Some of the females I've been playing it for and that listen to my project really like this one a lot. Shout out Addie, you know who you are. She fucks with this one a lot. She actually purchased the What's the Word shirt, so shout her out on that as well. And that's What's the Word.
Man, I don't really hang around with people nowadays. Too much bullshit on the street, I change my ways. Put my demons behind me and make that my past. Nothing ever lasts, I learn from my past. I've been changing up my ways.
So the next song we have is the song called My Past. Now this one's a little bit more personal towards my past in my life and some of my past experiences. This beat was produced on January 19th, 2020. At 5:43 p.m. I started the project. This is actually one of the tracks that Locastro really likes, I think, the most out of the whole project, or at least one of his top 3. And it originally just started with the actual sounds that you hear, which is... I think it's actually the same sound, but it's 2 different melody lines, and when you put them together you get something really nice that shuffles along and gives you a different feeling than the rest of the album. The steel drum that I added in after that actually came in terms of sequence right after that. I kind of had that in my head as soon as I had played the bells right off the bat. I had that in my head, like, oh, this could use a steel drum, let me put that in there. And ironically, the steel drum is the thing that creates the tension. It goes down that extra half step, which is outside the key signature, which gives it that like kind of tension. And I think that's one of the few songs on the album that actually does that. And then after I put the steel drum on top of the bells, I put in the bass itself. That was when I actually added the bass, like the synth bass. In terms of like intro, this is the only song on the album that actually features me talking on the intro, really, which I think I could have done a little bit more of, but I think it kind of makes this song stand out a little bit more. The drums, I think, came right after I had done the actual intro. I was kind of thinking of ways of how I could actually build it up and put some drums to it, and I actually came up with like this staccato bass on top of like the clap and the hi-hat and the kick. very simple to the point hi-hats, you know, pretty much 16th notes, a little bit of chopping, you know, towards the end of bar 4, but I kept it real simple. And then for the verses, you know, you go right back into the synth bass away from the 808. And the 808 really, I think, makes the hook stand out all the more because it gives it like that staccato-ness. Again, like just like You Don't Know Me. And this is actually one of those songs, again, where I bring up the string section, you know, you could actually hear in this. Towards the end. And on the verses, the second verse more so. And again, with that half step down outside the scale, gives it that tension, you know, in the song, just like the steel drum does, where it goes down half step out of the key signature. And I think, again, like I said, the fact that this song is written the way it is in terms of like that half step outside the scale, it adds like contrast to like the rest of the album. You're kind of getting towards the tail end of the album, so it's getting a little bit more darker and more personal and deeper and everything. And you know, the string section again ties all the way back into like how the songs are like classically influenced, you know, especially because I think this is also another one that is written, I think it's in C minor, but I used a lot of minor scales if it wasn't like the Hungarian scales, because minor and Hungarian are like where my mindset were for this project, and they all fit the vibe, you know. You can tell like it was like a lot more emotional. And then for the outro, it was kind of just simple, you know. This is another one that kind of ends abruptly, but it has its own outro. In terms of like the verses and stuff, I know I wrote the hook first because the hook was one of the easy things to write. I originally had the rhythm in my head, you know. I don't really hang around with people nowadays. Too much bullshit on the street, man, I changed my ways. And then I ended up writing the verses. The verses were kind of like, the first verse was easy. I know I wrote the first verse pretty fast. The second verse I ended up having to sit a little bit on. I think I recorded this one in February. So originally the first verse looks like it was recorded February 12th. And then the second verse kind of was like after that, like I was making changes subtly. So this one, like I said, is a little bit more personal. That's why I kind of wanted to take a little bit more time writing it. So I had the melodies, I know that for a fact. Like the second verse, when you actually hear the made a couple mistakes in my past, got arrested more than once, probably won't be my last. That was actually just melodies I had recorded, and then I ended up putting words to it later. So that's what I'm talking about when I say come up with the melodies and flows first, and then put words to it. So it was a little bit like longer in terms of writing, but it came together in my opinion. Since this song has a lot of tension to it, it kind of flows into like the track No Hope very easily, because you kind of just hear it. Like when I sequenced this album, I know that I was thinking like, alright, these songs all have to flow into one another. It has to be cohesive as a project. Even if you just pick one song out and listen to it, you know, I want it to all fit together, but I want you to also be able to listen to it as an individual track. So, technically the last full track, if you don't include the bonus, How's It Hanging, is No Hope. I think it is the oldest one on the album. And this was written, or started to be written and recorded in December of 2017. So the beat was originally started December 6th, 2017 at 2:06 p.m. And I originally just had the drums, to be honest. The drums and the clap and the bass, I think. And it kind of just snowballed from there, because I wanted to do a song kind of like Benny and the Jets from like Elton John, where he starts out with the crowd applause and whatnot, like standing ovation and whatnot. And that's really what this song is. It's like after the whole project of like epicness, in my opinion, it kind of just sums up the whole thing. You know, it starts out with an ending tail note of a bass and the clapping and the drums. Classic Aristide tag, you know, which I think that's the only track that has the Aristide tag on it, I think. And these are all stock sounds. This is another beautiful thing about this program, was this was written at a time when I didn't really have any like crazy plugins or anything. This was all stock sounds, right down to the bass, the drums, you know, everything. The only thing that's not stock was the guitar, because there's an acoustic guitar I recorded live on this very mic, sitting right where that camera is standing, you know, facing my door, and just playing live, you know. And you can hear the rawness in the guitar because of that, because a plugin will never give you that, you know. You can try all you want. Like on Complicated, I used an actual like electronic guitar that was in the program, you know. But for this song, I played the actual guitar part, and it really makes the difference, in my opinion, versus if I had tried using an actual electronic instrument, you know. But it really gives it that like Motown feel, even if you listen to it. I created my own reverb sound for this one specifically because I wanted it to sound like a little bit of like a Motown-ish kind of guitar. So this was the original sound I came up with as a guitar, because I remember saying to myself, oh, this would be a great, you know, guitar song. So I tried making a guitar sound, but it turned into like kind of like a vibraphone sound. That doesn't sound very much like a guitar at all, but you know, it kind of just worked out that way. And then I put a simple, you know, muted pluck guitar. I know it sounds out of key, but when you put it all together, it kind of just fucking glues together. I don't know how, but it's one of those things, you know. And then the bass, like I said, I started out with the drums and bass, so that was first. That was actually one of those instances. I think this is the only song on the album that uses drums and bass first before I actually came up with the melody. The acoustic guitar I had recorded live was done last. So this was the guitar. And if you take all those effects off, like the chain of effects that I made to like give it that sound, it sounds just like little stereoized. My favorite part though of the live guitar that I did was this. When you put the effects on. Solo on this too. So the piano solo came later on after I put the actual live guitar down and all that other stuff, because originally what I had heard in my head was the actual thing that you're about to hear. And I didn't play this live because this was back when I'd just been like starting out, like really understanding my production, you know, process and all that. So I kind of just said, alright, you hear it in your head, click it out, make it sound natural. So this is what I ended up coming with. guitar solo too. When the verse comes in. I mean the applause. So, with the words for this one, the hook originally was recorded in that December of 2017 by Jessica. And she killed it, dude. I'm sorry, like right off the bat, she didn't even have to come back and re-record that at all. She gave me, I think, a couple takes, and that was all I needed, was those couple takes to put together everything. But what ended up happening was I had a track called Frank Lucas. That's the name of the beat. It's never going to be called that probably, but I had written that first verse to that beat, and what ended up happening was that whole verse that is my first verse is only half of the first verse on that track. And I was messing around trying to write, and I was struggling. I was like, what am I going to put here? How am I going to say this? What am I going to say? And ironically, for some stupid reason, I thought of this verse when I was in the studio one day. And I started just singing it. And I was like, wow. So the first verse was just done like that. And the only thing I really had to write after that fact was the second verse. And the second verse wasn't that tough, because by that point I had had the first verse recorded. And I was just sitting there listening to it with the hook. So the second verse was recorded on January 5th, and it written around that time. And then I ended up doing dubs and whatnot around end of February, a week before February ended. And it all just snowballed together as like one of those beautiful moments where I really didn't have to do too much. And that was really it. I had this song in the stash so long. This, in my opinion, was when I started thinking about, let me start thinking about putting together my own album. And this really goes to show how long it could take some artist to fully recognize, like, I want to put out an album, you know, like, but what do I want it to sound like? You know, this was like the first step. Like, I knew as soon as I had finished this track, like, even before the words had been written or recorded or anything, that I was like, this is a gem, this is going to be a timeless record, this is going to be one of my biggest records, in my opinion, like, in terms of production and everything. And it did. In my opinion, this is one of my favorite tracks on the album because of the fact that it's the most who I am, you know, like, it's not hip-hop, it's not pop, it's just music. It's music to listen to, and that's what I wanted to put out. Last one standing shit, man. You heard? I appreciate everyone who's listened to it or supported and bought the merch. You know, again, shout out my brother who helped me design and manufacture it. Get at me if you're trying to purchase any of it. You know, I got a nice little stockpile, so keep selling it. It's been selling pretty good so far, so we'll keep that rolling, and I hope to eventually put out some more music for you guys. You know, I appreciate everyone who's been supporting. Love y'all, and this is Anastagio, man. Here at my home studio, June 12th, 2020. Peace.
Yeah. We get turned all day, every day. Shorty said she love me, yeah, for my ways. How's it hanging? I pray for you. Live your life, live it right, do what you feel inside. We get turned all day, every day. Shorty said she love me, yeah, for my ways. How's it hanging? I pray for you. Live your life, live it right, do what you feel inside. Level 2, what it do? How you been hanging in? Get a clue, deja vu, so where do I begin?